Christmas holidays. Now, the reason why I haven't done a book video in a while is because this year I've been studying for my final year of school, and I generally just haven't been reading as much. At least I haven't been reading enough to make adequate book content. So I thought, since I have finished school, I'm like probably 2 weeks out now from final exams, I thought that I would make a little video for you guys of the books that I have just finished, and the books that I'm currently reading, the book that I'm currently reading, and then the books that I'm going to probably read in the coming weeks. So let's just get straight into it, shall we? So the first book that I wanted to read coming out of school was 1984. Now, this is a copy of Animal Farm and 1984 within one book. And I thought this was a good deal when I bought it. I think I bought this in probably, well, last year, 2023, because I actually had to study the film of Animal Farm, the 1954 film. And I thought I would pick up the book as well to read, and I read the book in a day. So this was just sitting on my shelf for a pretty long time, so I thought I would read 1984 from this as well. Now the funny thing is that in our English syllabus for our final year of school, 1984 is actually one of the options for one of the topics. My school, however, did not do 1984. We did Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare. And so I thought I really want to read 1984. I also studied Stalin and the Soviet Union in modern history, so I thought it would be perfect to read 1984, and I thought it was really well written. I don't want to spoil anything because there isn't much of a plot line. There's kind of only one thing that happens throughout the whole novel, but the way that it's written and the way you come to understand how the characters actually feel and think in a totalitarian regime is really, really interesting. And I thought Orwell did a great job with this. For me, I studied the Animal Farm film that was produced in 1954, and I actually thought the context of that was much more interesting. For reference, 1984 was written after Animal Farm. I believe it was written in 1949, so just after World War II. And Animal Farm, the film, Animal Farm and 1984 are very similar in their messages, I guess. Anyway, so 1954, during the McCarthy era, it was a lot about Cold War, anti-communism, particularly in the West, so the US and England, and so it's really interesting to see the way that communism and also the way that totalitarian regimes are portrayed in these two books. So I thought it was good. I'm pretty sure I gave this a 5-star read. It is not a perfect novel. I will say that up front and straight. It is not a perfect novel. However, everything that you want, every message that you want out of this novel is there. reason behind why I ended up dropping History Extension, but I did end up dropping it for various reasons. But I still thought this was an interesting book. I had bought it. I still thought historiography was interesting, just maybe not, you know, the number one thing that I was interested in. So I ended up reading this. Well, I'm reading it now. I'm like halfway through it. I think that's about halfway. And yeah, it's pretty good. I will say there are some essays that I find more interesting than others. But as a whole, I think it's done quite well. I think it's also just because every essay is written by a different person. It's just edited by Helen Carr and Susanna Lipscomb. That I think has made it just like different styles of writing that I like more than others, as well as obviously different topics that I like more than others. So as of what I've read thus far, I will say my favourite, I think my favourite ones were What is Vernacular History by Sarah Churchwell and How Can We Write the History of Empire. Those were my two favourite chapters, and conveniently they were right next to each other as well. But I'm halfway through the book and I have found it pretty interesting. So there's that one. Alright, so now moving on to the ones that I want to read and will probably get to very soon. So I have Sally Rooney's Intermezzo. This is a fairly new book. I love Sally Rooney's work. I've read Normal People, that was definitely my favourite, and I also read Conversations with Friends. So when I saw this in the bookstore the other day, I thought, perfect, to get me back into reading, to get me back into the reading grind, this will be the perfect book. So I decided to pick this up, and it will probably be the next book that I'm reading. I used to read multiple books at a time, but now that I'm just getting back into reading, that's just not, you know, very realistic. So I am going to stick to one book at a time for now, but we'll see. Maybe next year we'll get back into reading multiple books at a time, or at least one fiction and one non-fiction at a time. At the moment, I'm really reading, like, you know, one book at a time. So there's this book. The back of it says, "The demands of other people do not dissolve. They only multiply. More and more complex, more difficult, which is another way, she thinks, of saying more life, more and more of life." Pretty dramatic. But I think Sally Rooney's books are really interesting, and I actually quite like that she doesn't use what are those things called, like as you can see, I've been out of school for 2 weeks, my brain doesn't work. What are those things called, like not inverted commas, what's it called, speech marks? My brain is not working. Anyway, yeah, I really like it. She doesn't use speech marks because I think it's the way that she writes is very much like the characters' brains are like kind of entangled in their real world talks about Freud in this as well. Oh yeah, here we go. Such questions anchor philosophy of mind, a field of study with cross-cultural roots and cross-disciplinary connections to psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, economics, and physics. So, I think it's really interesting, and I think it will help you understand how we think about how we think, if that makes sense. sharply cut prism through which to view our everyday experience. Okay, 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 okay. Interesting. We'll see how this goes. And the final book that I have here is a bit more light-hearted. This is The Queen's Gambit. As many of you are probably aware, there is a show on Netflix, I believe, that is The Queen's Gambit, and it is inspired by this book. It is the show that I believe got chessboards sold out in a lot of places globally, which I think is wild that people didn't know about chess prior to this. If you don't know, The Queen's Gambit is a very famous checkmate like maneuver that happens obviously when you're playing chess on the chessboard. And so this book is kind of based off of that. It's based off of, I believe it's a girl who just really likes playing chess. I can't remember the full story of it. I think she's an orphan, but I can't remember. But basically it's also like chess, it's very like male dominated field as well, and this little girl grows up and plays chess. I genuinely cannot remember exactly what happens in the TV show, so I think that reading this book will be really helpful to recall my memory. Anyway, as I was saying, I watched the show actually last year over Christmas, so I thought that it would be fitting that this year I read the book, like actually read the book. Oh yes, I can read you the back. She did go to an orphanage apparently, so I remembered correctly. Alright, so it says, when she is sent to an orphanage at the age of 8, Beth Harmon soon discovers 2 ways to escape, albeit fleetingly, her surroundings: playing chess and taking the little green pills given to her and the other children to keep them subdued. Before long, it becomes apparent that hers is a prodigious talent, and as she progresses to the top of the US chess rankings, she is able